Hello, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we're going to discuss the situation in Ukraine as of July 7th, 2025. Today brought an enormous number of very interesting developments, so let's get started. We'll begin with the fact that it's becoming increasingly clear that since late June, the Russian Federation has gradually been shifting to a new tactic in conducting military operations. Currently, there is a strong emphasis not only on advancing along the front lines, but also on diplomatic efforts on the international stage. More and more frequently, Russian forces are carrying out strikes and launching attacks aimed at discrediting the Ukrainian government and swaying as many Ukrainian civilians as possible to their side. One of the most notable recent developments was the series of strikes on the territorial recruitment centers, TRCs. For example, during July, strikes have been recorded on TRCs in the city of Kryvyi Rih, where a massive explosion occurred just a few days ago. Strikes also hit the city of Kremenchuk, where the TRC building was heavily damaged, possibly destroyed, or at the very least paralyzed. These are not isolated incidents. The Russian Federation continues its daily strikes, and we see that the number and geographical scope of these strikes are expanding. According to open-source information, the Russian side has struck at least 4 or even 5 settlements, particularly targeting TRCs. One of the most notable examples was a strike in Kharkiv. From Kharkiv, we've seen some of the most striking footage, including drone strikes directly hitting the TRC building in the city center. The structure appears to have been almost completely destroyed. As a result, for at least one day, if not more, mobilization in Kharkiv was halted or severely limited. Comments from Ukrainian social media and public channels suggest that this situation is highly welcomed by the local population, at least by those hiding in their homes or apartments. We're referring to potential conscripts who could be mobilized if they were to leave their residences. It seems likely that in the coming months, the Russian Federation will continue to increase these efforts to discredit the Ukrainian government, especially around key dates involving martial law extensions, parliamentary debates, votes, or presidential decrees. Now let's move to the front lines. There have been some very interesting updates, especially from the Pokrovsk agglomeration. On July 7th, or possibly July 6th, though video evidence only surfaced today, we saw the beginning of a major assault on the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Let's briefly go over the entire front, starting from the Sumy direction, which also saw noteworthy developments. According to the official report from the Russian North Military Grouping and the Ministry of Defense, Russian forces have completely cleared the village of Beselovka, located near the state border in the area of Tetkino. This strategic foothold was taken, and the first footage of Russian troops advancing in the area was published several days ago. We have footage from July 4th showing Russian assault troops advancing along forest strips toward Beselovka, clearing out Ukrainian positions. 3 days later, the village was fully secured. This location is significant. Ukrainian forces from the 225th and 425th Assault Regiments had used Beselovka and nearby Iskrashena to attack Tetkino and push toward Novi Put and the area between Zarya and Prudy. The loss of Beselovka marks a major setback for Ukraine. Now, in order to stop further attacks on Russian territory, Russian forces must push toward the village of Iskrivshchina. If this settlement is cleared, Ukraine will likely halt its operations against the Kursk region on this part of the front. This raises an important question. Was the attack on Beselovka part of creating a full buffer zone up to the railway running from Kiev through Vorozhba and Bilopilya to Sumy, essentially a wide safety corridor? Or was it a limited operation targeting key villages like Beselovka, Volfino, and Makiivka to halt incursions into Kursk? It's too early to say. We'll need to wait and see how the situation unfolds. Additionally, Ukraine still holds relatively firm positions on the Sumy front, having stabilized their line and begun preparing counterattacks. The primary target of these efforts appears to be the village of Kondratovka. Ukrainian forces are amassing troops to strike from the south, southwest, west, and northwest. Drone footage confirms these concentrations. In response, Russian forces are targeting these staging areas with FAB bombs, tube artillery, and air-dropped ordnance. The goal is to completely thwart Ukraine's planned counteroffensive in this sector. According to geolocated footage, by the end of July 6th, The road from the border to Kondratovka was under Russian control. However, as of today, Ukrainian forces seem to control a forest strip leading toward Kondratovka, potentially disrupting supply lines. Ground fighting is expected soon. Elsewhere, Russian forces appear to be wrapping up their operation in the village of Vorochino. Several pro-Russian analysts claim it has been nearly fully cleared. Confirmation from the North Grouping or the Ministry of Defense could follow shortly. That would allow further advances toward the next defensive line. In Yunakovka, however, there are no major updates. Fighting continues, with both sides holding roughly 50% of the village. Neither side appears to be making significant gains. In the Miropolia area, there is a high concentration of strikes, especially on forested areas near the village of Kucheryov. These are being hit with tube artillery, multiple rocket launchers, thermobaric systems, and aviation. It appears Russia is trying to cut off the salient between Kucheryov, Goptovka, Alexandria, and Hornal to encircle Miropolia from the east. Moving on to the northern Kharkiv front toward Kupiansk. No major activity or advances were recorded in the last 24 hours. However, one notable event was an Iskander missile strike on the 154th Mechanized Brigade near Chuhuiv, based on reconnaissance that identified personnel and what appeared to be a training camp. About 40 Ukrainian troops were reportedly killed in this strike. These units were expected to reinforce Ukrainian defenses in northeastern Kharkiv, where Russian forces are actively pushing forward. Regarding Kupiansk itself, no new confirmations were received today on the status of Mirovaya and Sobolevka. Recently, the Ministry of Defense announced these villages were secured, placing Kupiansk in a semi-encircled state. Today, we've only seen drone strike footage targeting Ukrainian positions inside Kupiansk itself, with no new territorial updates. Now onto the southern Kupiansk, or Lyman front, where after a long operational pause, Russian forces have resumed offensive actions. Reports from neutral and pro-Russian sources indicate movement toward the villages of Glushenkovo and Novyi Mir. Some sources say Novyi Mir is on the verge of being fully cleared. There's also a noted Russian advance toward Lyman through Shandrigalovo, Kolodyazy, and Zelenaya Dolina. Significant map updates have been made. Just yesterday, on July 6th, the map looked one way. Today, multiple credible sources show Russian forces gaining control of several dozen square kilometers. The distance to Shandrigalovo has been shortened from at least 3 directions. Movement is underway along the Natrius River in the southern part of Karpovka. There is also movement north of the village of Zelenaya Dolina, along forest strips and wooded areas. Advancements are also reported to the south of Zelenaya Dolina. However, on the other hand, some pro-Russian experts reliably report today that the Ukrainian side has continued its counterattack attempts in the area of the village of Red Kudub. It is said that certain units of the Ukrainian armed forces have even managed to reach the village of Katerinovka. Next, we move on to the Seversk section of the front. Although there is still no confirmed information about Russian forces entering the northeastern part of the town of Seversk, despite repeated reports from mainly pro-Russian experts, we can see that the intensity of combat in this area is very high. And this intensity of combat suggests only one thing. Either it is artillery preparation ahead of a ground assault, or the Russian army is using heavy fire to distract Ukrainian FPV drone operators and artillery crews to allow Russian assault units to advance more calmly into the northern and northeastern parts of Seversk. Let me remind you that, according to certain cartographers and analysts, the Russian army is already present in forest areas and defensive structures just a few hundred meters from the town. The Ukrainian side is attempting to redeploy units, possibly to stabilize the front line. Meanwhile, Russian drones constantly patrol the town, destroying anything that starts to move. Additionally, by the end of July 7th, Russian forces reportedly cleared at least 60% of the village of Serebryanka, considered by both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian experts as the gateway to Seversk. Now we move to the Constantinovka front. As for the Klebanbyk Reservoir, the town of Chasov Yar, or the area along the Seversky-Donets-Donbass Canal, there have been no changes. There is moderate combat activity, with artillery strikes mainly targeting Alexandro Shultino and Belaya Gora. These locations currently show the most storming activity by Russian forces trying to eliminate this salient. However, everything is proceeding within the bounds of standard ongoing combat operations, without any heightened intensity from Russia. On the other hand, the highest activity is observed along the N32 highway, which is where the most sensational developments of the past 24 hours have come from. Let's start with the main headline. The front line east of the Pokrovsk agglomeration has clearly and definitively collapsed. Today, based on objective control footage, the Russian armed forces have established control over at least 10% of Novo-economic Noe. Some cartographers are already marking 30 to 40% of the eastern flank of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration as Russian-controlled. Now let's go step by step and compare maps from different dates. Here's how the map looked just yesterday, July 6th. Russia had cleared Razino and was slowly advancing into the northeastern part of Novo-economic Noe. There was no indication that an offensive toward Novo-economic Noe and Nikolevka would begin from the south. And today, we see a small advance toward the northeastern part of Novo-economic Noe. Objective control footage confirms the presence of Russian units along forest lines. We won't show that footage here due to graphic violence. But Russian forces are also seen advancing toward the central part of Novo-economic Noe. That footage is available. This footage was published by the Ukrainian side. We see a Mangal tank with a mine-clearing device, trawl, clearing a path for 2 Russian troop carriers. Ukraine attempts to stop the Russian vehicles using FPV drones. The Russian trawl reaches the town, but then turns around and retreats, while the 2 troop carriers continue advancing into Novo-economic Noe, periodically deploying troops in different parts of the town. By the evening of July 7th, 2 strike locations were geolocated. One hit was on Russian equipment here, and the second one occurred in the central part of Novo-economic Noe. Based on these, the maps are being updated. Furthermore, some pro-Russian analysts are already coloring in the entire eastern sector up to Nikolaevka, and also the fields between Malinovka and Elizavetovka. So, by the end of July 7, 2025, according to some experts and cartographers, Russian forces approximately control everything east and south of this red line, marked as the contact line. We can see the assault on Novo-economic Noe has begun. This is already part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. In addition to the storming of Novo-economic Noe, we also see a high concentration of strikes just to the north. Most likely, these strikes are intended to prevent a flank attack by Ukrainian forces, which could threaten Russian troops currently concentrated in Novo-economic Noe. The entire direction is being hit by FAB bombs, thermobaric Solntsepiok strikes, and MLRS systems. Artillery is active, but so are Russian assault troops. Today we even saw footage of Russian infantry and assault troops moving through the village of Popovy Yar. It is possible the entire village will soon be fully controlled by the Russian army. There is also a high concentration of strikes on the town of Pokrovsk itself, likely as part of a diversionary tactic. Apparently, the main Ukrainian reserves are concentrated in Pokrovsk, at least the operational ones capable of quickly deploying to Novo-economic Noe. Maximum fire is being directed at these positions to disrupt Ukrainian responsiveness and prevent rapid deployment toward Novo-economic Noe. On the other hand, Russia may also be planning diversionary attacks on the southwestern and southern sectors of the Pokrovsk agglomeration to tie down Ukrainian forces and close the pincers from both northeast and southwest. It's clear that the battles for Novo-economic Noe and perhaps the southwestern part of Pokrovsk will answer the main question. Has the battle for Pokrovsk already begun? Or will additional preparation be required before the full-scale assault? Based on how the Russian army is advancing and the available objective footage, the conclusion is clear. The battle for Pokrovsk has begun. Now we move to the Dinipropatrovsk direction. Here, Russian forces continue to put pressure on Ukrainian positions on the western bank of the Mokry Yaly River. And today, there are many interesting details and nuances. Russia continues to target logistics by destroying bridges used by the Ukrainian military, especially those along the border between the Dinipropatrovsk and Donetsk regions. Bridges near Ivanovka are being destroyed. Russian units are advancing in Mirna according to control footage and various cartographic updates. The village of Mirn is now in a semi-encirclement. the Ukrainian side is slowly starting to evacuate personnel from the village, but all surrounding fields are under heavy fire control, including from drones. We see another failed Ukrainian attempt to escape the encirclement. A Russian drone chased down a vehicle and appears to have destroyed it with a direct hit. Further north, the Ukrainian side attempts a counterattack to unblock their troops in the northern part of Podubna. Footage shows close combat between Ukraine's 5th Mechanized Tank Brigade and Russian forces in the village of Tolstoy. Ukrainian mechanized troops entered the village and, from close range, took out buildings one by one, not allowing Russian forces to gain a foothold. Based on this, most cartographers are now marking the eastern part of Tolstoy under Ukrainian control. Most likely the Vostok group will report tomorrow that the village has been cleared. A very interesting situation is developing today in the village of Dakhnaya. Russia's Ministry of Defense reported that on July 7th, one village in Dinipropatrovsk region had come under Russian control, namely Dakhnaya. However, about 1 to 2 hours before the publication of this report, Ukrainian forces from the 37th Marine Brigade released a video showing them raising the Ukrainian flag in the northwestern part of Dakhnaya, effectively disputing Russia's claim of full control. This suggests to me that Ukraine's main intelligence directorate might be receiving Russian MOD reports hours before public release. At the very least, the flag-raising footage suggests the Ukrainian side knew in advance that Russia would announce the capture of Dakhnaya today, and they acted accordingly. We'll continue to watch the situation. Perhaps in the near future, we'll hear news about arrests, even within the Russian Ministry of Defense. And that's all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.